Hey, what's up, everyone? Just in this video, I want to share a little story about how, I decided to stop smoking weed and eventually just kind of got over it. Um, when I was like 6 or 7 years old, my sister, who was 5 years older than me, she used to hang out with a lot of like skateboarders, and this was in the late 90s. I was born in 1990, so this was like 1996, 7, 8, around that time. And yeah, her and her friends were smoking a lot of weed, and I guess they thought it was cute to get me high as fuck. And I was taking bong loads with them and thinking I was, impressing and being cute in front of my sister's older friends. And I guess that kind of turned into like a lifelong addiction, so to speak. But I never saw it as a problem when I was young because, there was drugs in my household, and, amphetamines and cocaine, I guess. And, my mom always told me that weed was natural, and, she didn't really try to hide her smoking habits. And, it was pretty easily accessible. She would try to like keep her stash, but I kind of always knew how to find it, how to get to it. And I would steal her roaches. And I remember being in the car with her as a kid, and she had a little sneak a toke, a little cigarette thing with the roach at the end, and she'd be smoking, and I always kind of liked the smell of it. I tried smoking some of her cigarettes before and didn't really enjoy that, so I knew that I really enjoyed the taste and the feeling of smoking weed. It was like, it used to make you just giggle, and back then it was stress. It was like mech weed where you'd have to like pick the seeds and stems out. So it wasn't like this super potent, ridiculously strong weed back then. And I was able to kind of like build a tolerance, I guess, from a very, very young age, sadly, now looking back. So, I had I never got into other drugs, basically. And it was, when I was about 13, 14, obviously, I wasn't smoking nonstop as a little kid. That wouldn't have been acceptable. But I would like sneak around with my friends, and we'd be smoking weed whenever we could get some. I guess about 6th grade, I had friends who knew people that sold weed, and we'd go in on a sack and just be rebellious. But I always had dreams and aspirations of playing sports. I was an athlete. I played youth football and basketball and baseball. My main focus was football. I was a quarterback. I was a leader, and I was, focused on being the best athlete I could, until about 7th or 8th grade, when I started getting in trouble and having a lot of difficulties in school and at home. At this time, I moved with my dad, who was very abusive, and my uncles just grew up in a very abusive household. My dad was in a rock and roll band with my uncles, and he wasn't really around much. And when he was with them practicing, or doing shows. And I was more raised by my grandparents. And around 12 or 13 was when I started getting in trouble. I ended up in juvenile hall and formal probation, having to go to drug court and the juvenile hall schools and all that stuff. Did a lot of time. Was always in and out of juvenile hall. I'd actually gotten arrested for a crime that I didn't commit. I was just kind of hanging out with the wrong crowd, and this kid was like tagging under a bridge. And the friends that I was with like tried to get some money out of him by telling him that the cops came and saw the tagging and were trying to blame us for the tagging, and that we would take the blame if he paid us some money. Again, this was these people's idea that I was with, this older guy. And I just kind of was there and went along with it, and ended up, getting arrested shortly after. The kid went home and told his dad or whoever that, that I hit him and took his wallet, that we robbed him, basically. I don't know. I think his dad was just trying to stick up for his son who had gotten punked, and had his son go along with this story, saying that I hit him. They didn't know my older friend, they knew me, so the cops came to my house right away because the kid was my age, and took me away for grand theft robbery, assault and battery, and extortion. And my life was turned upside down for a few years. You know, my dreams and aspirations, they were all shattered. And on top of that, I couldn't quit smoking weed because I felt like weed wasn't the problem. I felt like it was the only thing that really helped me deal with the abuse and the torment that I was going through at home. And then on top of the stress of being on formal probation, it actually helped with that. However, it was illegal, of course, and I was being drug tested now, and next thing you know, I'm getting locked up for 30 days at a time, or until I get 3 consecutive clean tests, just for smoking weed. I ended up in drug court, having to go to drug court every Thursday, and it got to the point where they're like, if you test dirty one more time, we're going to send you away to a boys camp, for 6 months. And then I knew that if that happened, I wasn't going to be able to play football, So, after years of being on this formal probation and getting locked up for 30 days at a time, mind you, there was like meth heads and people who smoked, doing heroin and all this stuff that were just having to be there for a weekend, and they'd get out and doing far more crimes than I had. Like, after all this time, and on top of that, the kid that said that I had hit him and took his wallet, that I had gotten arrested for assaulting, as he claimed, he was now trying to like tell the truth. He sent me messages on MySpace and saying like, I'm sorry I ruined your life. If there's any way that I can, come and tell them what really happened, I'm willing to. And I showed my probation officer in the court these messages from MySpace, it was at the time, and I told him, look, like I told you all along, I never hit this kid. What really happened was he was tagging, and he's willing to admit that, and he's trying to apologize for having me in trouble. But the courts didn't care. By this time, I was so far deep in the juvenile system. They said either way it was extortion, and I was just so deep in it that they weren't trying to hear it. My dad wasn't really on my side. My dad was so like strict and against me that he would like be calling my probation officer whenever he would like find an apple under my bed, or like catch me smoking, or if I smelled like weed, and it got to the point where my probation officer was like, man, like this guy's dad is like really something else, like out of control. Like they looked at me and were like, I'm sorry, like a couple times in meetings when my dad was like flipping out, trying to have me arrested. Come to find out now, my dad is a narcissistic boomer psychopath, basically. But at the time, I didn't know that this stuff was not normal. I just thought, my dad is really strict, and I'm just fucking up, I guess. And I have this monkey on my back, and I'm going to be institutionalized for the rest of my life, I assumed. I believed, and God had me in this situation. I'd be in juvenile hall praying to God, please help me quit smoking weed. Please help me be surrounded with people who are going to help me and lift me up. And no matter what, I would get out and get into it with my dad or whoever, and I would go back to smoking weed because it was the only thing that made me feel normal, and helped me relax and focus. And eventually, when I was 16 or so, after 3 years of this, being stuck with that monkey on my back on probation and testing dirty and all this, and going through high school and starting to sell weed and run with like more and more dangerous crowds and just older people, and getting into like real criminal activity because I thought that that's what I was going to be, and that became who I knew. No one on my football team, or like not of my classmates, really were going through anything like I was going through. Like I was probably one out of 50 or 100 that was going to juvenile hall and like on formal probation. There wasn't really many kids. So the only kids I was able to really relate to were the ones that were also in similar situations. And some of them weren't wrongfully accused like myself. They were actually like, criminals, for lack of a better term, or, stuck in the system for things that they actually did. And I tried to be righteous as I could during that time. I tried to, stick up for people against bullies and fight people that I feel like deserve to have their ass whooped, or like, do things to people that I believe had it coming, or people who threatened me. I would basically like have my own justice with them, for lack of a better term, and me not wanting to incriminate myself anymore. I was a fuck up. I did a lot of things that I'm not proud of, but at the time I felt were justified, because it was basically like a reaction to them attacking me, or trying to talk bad about me, basically, and write my girlfriend letters or something at the time. Like, it's like, I had people probably more fearful of me than love and respected, but I had I believe I have a good amount of people that respected me because they knew that my heart was in the right place. But there was also a lot of people I know that like envied me because I had this like rough like appearance, and it was all backed by like real life stuff that I was going through that most people couldn't just claim. But anyway, that's besides the point. So when I was 16, I told my dad, I was like, I'm selling weed, I have all this money, and this was a really new thing. This was like 2006, when not a lot of people had gotten legalized for marijuana. I told my dad, I was like, they're about to send me to boys camp for 6 months. They said this is my last chance. I was on an electric monitoring, I had an EM bracelet. I was going to the school called La Via Esperanza, which was at the juvenile hall. Times I had been, I would test dirty and they would lock me up in juvenile hall. And then I'd still go to the school that was like in the front of the juvenile hall. And sometimes, I think it was like furlough, I forget what they call it, but anyway, I'd be in school in a green jumpsuit, and at the end of the day, all the other kids would go home and I would have to go back to juvenile hall. And I had my friends like bringing me cranberry pills and charcoal pills, trying to help me get clean while I was in there. Well, this time, I told my dad, they said next time you test dirty, that's it, we're sending you off. I was 16 years old, and I told my dad, if we don't go to LA to try to get this medical marijuana license, this doctor to give me a note saying that I should be allowed to smoke marijuana, I'm just gonna go on the run. I had my mind set. I had enough money to just leave and disappear until I was 18, at least I thought I did. I probably had like maybe less than 10 grand, and I was just like, I was just ready to say fuck it and go on the run and come back when I was 18 and turn myself in and do time or whatever, and then hopefully not have that monkey on my back, because I felt like I was never gonna get out. So I told my dad, I was like, he knew I was serious. So he finally agreed and drove me down to LA. I'd done a lot of research on this, and we saw this doctor, Dr. William Eidelman, who was one of the first doctors to give people legal prescriptions in Los Angeles. And I explained to him my situation. I said, look, I'm on electric monitoring. I've been on formal probation, and I just can't stop smoking weed. It helps me a lot. And sure enough, the doctor had no problem writing me a prescription for Marinol. I told him, I have ADD or whatever, and the doctor's like, oh, absolutely, marijuana helps with ADD far better than any other type of pill that they want, pharmaceutical pill. So, and this is natural. So he gave me a prescription for Marinol, and I went to La Via Esperanza, the juvenile hall school that I was going to at the time, and I told him, look, I got legalized for marijuana. Here's my doctor's prescription. So when you test me today, I'm going to test dirty for marijuana. And they just looked at me completely shocked, and they're like, well, we'll find out about this on Thursday when you go to drug court. And they started telling me, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, the judge is going to make an example out of you in drug court. um, you know and sure enough, when I went to court on Thursday, the judge detained me, and I was kept in juvenile hall. And they were doing everything they could to get me to give up my medical marijuana prescription, and for me to no longer have it. And they're like, we'll give you one more chance if you just give up your marijuana license. But at the time, I had a public defender. Her name was Jennifer Archer. God bless her. I think she was kind of up and coming, and she saw this as a opportunity for her to grow her resume. And if she won this case, it would reflect well on her and her future. So she's like, Matt, like, it might take some time, but let's wait it out, and let's fight this case against the DA and the judge. So I had to wait it out in juvenile hall while these doctors and Harvard doctors and lawyers and all these people, specialists, make time in their schedule to come to this court date, to speak on my behalf, to say why I should be allowed to smoke marijuana. So finally the day came in court, after them making several offers to me to give up my marijuana prescription. And it was like a movie. These people were going back and forth with the DA. The DA was yelling at these doctors like, my brother has testicular cancer, like he should have a marijuana license, not this kid, like, you know what I mean? And so you would give your child medical marijuana? They were hammering these doctors and lawyers and whatnot. And the doctor's like, yeah, I would. He should have marijuana, and he needs it, and these are the benefits, and this is what the medical codes say or whatever, and you're not a doctor. And basically that's what it came down to. My public defender was like, you're not a doctor. This is what these doctors say. And they basically got sorry, I got a little distracted. I'm over here at this job site waiting for an inspector to come to do an inspection. So they basically were like, you're not a doctor, and there's nothing you can do. The doctors say he can have it. So the judge decided I couldn't continue to be on probation and going to the juvenile hall school, so they just let me off of everything. They terminated my probation unsuccessfully and let me go. And just like that, after this like 3 or 4 years of battling the juvenile system for a crime that I didn't even commit, and doing all this time in juvenile hall and having my dream and my life completely turned upside down, I was a free man, thanks to marijuana. So I know I started this video saying this is why I stopped smoking marijuana, but this is more just like my story. Marijuana has served its purpose for me in parts of my life, and sometimes I just needed a little bit of direction. I wish I would have had someone tell me and guide me and help me in my life more. But this is all God's plan, so this is what happened. This is just my story. So they let me out of juvenile hall. They let me off probation. I was a free man. My public defender looked at me and she said, if you get in any trouble before you're 21, you're fucked. Those were her last words to me. Because they didn't seal my record. So I still had this grand theft robbery, assault and battery, and extortion on my record until I was able to get it sealed. And that's a whole nother story in itself. The things they try to come after me for later. And the battles I had with my dad, and just the hell that I went through in my teenage years. But so I got out and I kept smoking heavy. I thought I would smoke until I die. I smoked so much weed, and this was like 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009. I'm just getting high, and some of the most important developmental years of my life, where you're supposed to be preparing yourself for becoming an adult. I'm just smoking. I'm like making music. I'm like an artist. I was doing hip hop. I grew up playing in punk rock bands, playing guitar, and when I started getting locked up, I started rapping and telling my story and my struggles, and hopefully and trying to like inspire people and give people, something that they could relate to, who were going through similar struggles. So I'm smoking weed and I'm trying to be a rapper. I'm trying to be an artist, and I'm like selling weed. So I'm at family events like Thanksgiving, Christmas, birthdays, and my phone rings. I'm like, oh, I gotta go sell this sack. I gotta go do this. And like always putting hustle and money. I'm like influenced by like degenerate rap music and thinking that this is the cool thing to do. I'm like fucking off relationships. I'm like just not, looking back, I'm like just not a great person. I'm just high all the time. It's like it was so lame, That's how I look at it now. Of course, it seemed cool at the time, and the friends that I had and were all there when I had weed, right? Until I didn't, and then it was like phone stopped ringing, don't hear from anybody. And that's another thing too. I remember when I was like getting locked up all the time, and I was like selling weed around that time too, but I would get locked up for 30 days or whatever for going on the run or whatever it was that I would get locked up for. And all of the friends that I had who were always hanging around and there because I had weed and were buying weed off of me because I always had to try to have the best weed, quality, every time I got out, they were all trying to do the same thing I was doing. They had found a new plug and they were trying to sell to all my clientele. They were listening to all the music that all the degenerate rap music. It actually wasn't all degenerate. There was some good stuff in there, but basically they were all trying to do me and were no longer like loyal to me, like I would expect them to be. If there were situations like I would have had their backs far more. I feel like it just wasn't it wasn't mutual. The love wasn't mutual. It was a different type of love from clientele or people that were fair weather friends. So, I'm going through these years of my life just smoking like crazy, and I get kicked out of my house. I'm living out of my car. I'm struggling trying to be a rapper. I'm couch surfing. I'm doing anything I can to survive, any type of jobs. I'm dishwashing. I'm probably smelling like weed going into interviews. So, I had no direction. I was supposed to play football, through college. That was like the only thing I had was like, you're going to go to college, play football, and, see what happens. But all of that got derailed, and I didn't have anyone tell me you could go to college and study this, or you can do this, you can go to trade school. No, because I didn't really get along with my dad, and I got kicked out, and I was just struggling to survive, smoking weed, couch surfing, trying to make music. And all this for about 10 years, until I was about 26 years old. And, I had some friends. We all went in on this space where we built a recording studio, and, I was making music. And of course, things get a little bit deeper now, where it's like I'm living in Southern California, where it's predominantly, Mexican, Hispanic, when you're living in a poor area. So I'm like the one white guy, right? And I just come to find like there's no loyalty with a lot of these people that I thought were my friends. And it comes back to like when we're not smoking weed together, like we really didn't have anything in common or any reason to be associating with each other. And a lot of times they got into far worse than weed. They started doing coke or whatever, and it came down to like things getting stolen from the recording studio. And it's like these people had all their cokehead friends there in the studio, and it's like, I don't want anyone here who's not here to make music. It got like that, some things came missing, and it's like, fuck that. Unless you get the shit back, we figure out what's going on with it, someone admits to it, like no one's gonna be here who's not here to make music. And they took that shit personal and stopped coming around the studio, stopped paying their portion. So I was left on my own with this one other dude, and we just said, fuck this shit, wrapped it up, and I was back to living out of my car, you know, couch surfing. And then that was when I finally got an opportunity to get into the electrical trade. And that was when I started doing electrical, stopped making music, and started focusing on trying to get out of my car, pay my car off that I was fine. I made the mistake of financing, and just try to better my future. And I was super late, 26 years old. Not that I wasn't trying to get into the trades before, I just never got an opportunity because they never wanted to hire apprentices. They usually only want journeymen. So I had done roofing demolition, water damage restoration, asbestos removal, breathing in asbestos. It wasn't for lack of trying or poor work ethic that I was in this situation, living out of my car. It's just, I grew up in Santa Barbara where everything is really expensive, and there was no way I was going to pay for a car payment and work these type of jobs that were paying shit and still be able to keep a roof over my head. And I was done trying to like rent rooms or share rooms or, you know, with people. I just wanted to be by myself, and was dealing with a lot of past trauma as well, right? And just wanted to smoke, and just the days were just flying by, right? Just getting high. So I'm living out of my car, I'm meditating, I'm praying, I'm doing everything I can. I finally get this opportunity as an electrician. I try to make the most of it, but I'm still smoking weed. I'm showing up to work high. I'm performing well though, because I'm a functional weed smoker, right? At least I thought. But, you know, I'm content just being a helper because I don't want all this responsibility, right? I'm good just making, you know, whatever, 22 an hour instead of 14 an hour like I had been making for so long, right? I'm like stoked. Cars getting paid off. You know, let's however many years go by just doing that, getting high as fuck at lunch. And it gets to the point where, you know, a few years go by, and basically I realize, like, you know, when I'm smoking weed, I'm so tired after work. I go chill at my friend's house. I'm on his couch. We're having real life, deep conversations. We're studying spirituality, you know, Sanatana Dharma, the Bhagavad Gita, looking deeper than I'd ever gone into history, race realism, the history of our, you know, European ethnicity, after being taught to hate like myself for so long and being surrounded by so many people I feel I had to like dumb myself down for. I'm finally like digging deep into who I really was. But at the same time, I'm like smoking, and it just wasn't benefiting me the way I felt it was for so long. And I'm coming to realize like how much time I wasted just being high all the time, you know? I guess there were things I needed to work on within myself, and it wasn't until I was able to like learn about our true history and a lot you know, I had to like re-educate myself and unlearn a lot of things that I'd been indoctrinated and programmed with, you know, being in the education system as little as I was, right? Even though, because I was going in and out of juvenile hall and in these juvenile hall schools and cutting class and all this stuff, and not really agreeing with them. But, you know, they teach you this stuff and you don't really look any further into it unless you do, right? Later on in life, you become self-educated. And like I said, I didn't get to go to college, but I still was hungry to learn. I do love reading. You know, watching documentaries and you know, that's a whole nother story in itself. When I got off probation and out of juvenile hall, I did home hospital for a time to catch up on credits. So I was able to catch up enough to be able to play football my senior year. However, you know, the damage had been done, and, you know, my coach refused to let me play offense when I was a quarterback and, you know, a receiver, but they wouldn't let me play because of my past. They didn't know that I was innocent of the crimes, and that this kid admitted that I didn't hit him and take his thing. I was just notorious in their eyes, and not someone that they were proud to have represent their program and have on the front page of the newspaper. So they only let me play defense. I played my heart out, and I watched this other quarterback throw 3 interceptions every game, and my team lost every single game. And by the 7th game of the season, I was ineligible. And I was just so lost because all I wanted to do was smoke weed, and I couldn't keep up academically, that I failed all my classes. And it got to the point where I was going to football practice, but I wasn't going to any of my classes. And the coach even knew, but he knew how much I love football and how much it meant to me, that he didn't cut me from the team until week 7. And I didn't have anybody at home supporting me. I'm still going through hell with my dad. I'm still being talked down to and abused, and my dad's still trying to fight me all the time. And my dad and my uncle's trying to push my buttons and get me arrested, basically. So there was that. But that to say, that's when I got into becoming self-educated, was when I was doing home hospital, and I started watching documentaries and writing songs, and the teacher gave me school credits for doing these things. So that was cool. And later in life, it came back to where it benefited me, because I was willing to have an open mind, and I knew that we had been lied to for so long. And there was alternative sources of information where you can use your own discernment and kind of like put all the pieces together however you see to form your own conclusions, right? There's always, alternative sources. And so I did that with my own history, and my dad abusing me for so long and having his own racism, whatever you want to call it. He just hated white people. He hated my mom. People with blonde hair, blue eyes were pretty people that got everything given to them, and they were privileged. And that whole communist, boomer, narcissist, liberal mentality where, the white man is evil. Like, I was beat down with that my whole life until I came to learn that this was by design. You know what I mean? Cultural Marxism, communism. Learned about what really happened in World War II. And I broke the chains, basically, of the programming, and learned to love myself. And I went on a spiritual journey. I stopped eating meat and was completely plant-based for 8 years, was completely alkaline for 8 years. No meat, no dairy. I was strictly going by Dr. Sebi's recommendations, food recommendations, because I also had some sicknesses. I went to the hospital with acute pancreatitis. They told me it was because I was having pain in my pancreas, and they said, "You have pancreatitis. Have you done a lot of drugs?" And I says, "No, I drank a lot, but not like enough to do this type of damage, I would imagine." So I had to clean my act up. I had a stone in my saliva gland. It kept swelling up, and it wouldn't heal properly. So there was time when I couldn't eat. So it was almost easy for me to stop eating, and only eat healthy things that were going to help me stay nourished and be able to survive. So I did that. And I went on this whole spiritual journey that led me to eventually finally stop smoking weed. And when I stopped smoking weed and was going on this whole spiritual journey, I just realized how much of my life I had wasted smoking weed. And I wish, like I said, it served its purpose, but I wish I had people in my life who would have helped me find myself and find ways to heal and encourage me and told me the right things, and help me get through these troubled times. And I hope that I can be that for some people in the future. I hope I can encourage my son and my children, and for them not to have to go through any of these things that I've gone through to get to where I'm at this point in my life, And, eventually I started smoking CBD, and it's like all the medicinal benefits without the high, So, because I enjoyed the ritual of smoking still at the time, It's been almost maybe like 6 or 7 months since I've smoked anything at all now, because I'm just at that point. But for a while, instead of THC, it was like, I like smoking CBD. I would have friends come over and they would smoke their THC joints, and I would roll my own little CBD joint. And one of my friends who was around me at the time, his name is Chris. He was in this program I had to go through the juvenile court. He was in there as well. And he's like, man, Matt, like, the fact that you only smoke CBD now just shows that you really were just trying to medicate, you know? And all that time you did in juvenile hall for smoking weed, when the truth, it really was, you were just trying to like medicate. You really did just need that part of it. And, you know, I wish I had found CBD like long before, you know? Maybe I wouldn't have been as lost or feel like I wasted so many years of my life just being high as fuck. And, you know, it's like, is what it is, you know? So I smoked CBD for a while, and, you know, eventually about a year ago, I had to get out of California. I moved out of California. Things fell apart where I lived. I was doing well. I was maintaining a job. Like I said, I was in the electrical trade for 8 years as well. Coincidentally, around the same time I stopped eating meat and dairy was when I became an electrician. Grew my hair out. I had hair down to my belly button at one time, until a couple years ago. And you know, I was renting an studio apartment. I finally got out of my car. Man, that's a whole story in itself. But I moved into this studio apartment and had nothing but a yoga mat. You know, I'd been living out of my car for 3 years, while being an electrician, showering at the YMCA. A lot of people wouldn't have known that I was homeless, you know, but I was. And I was in this studio apartment for another like 4 years. I loved it. I was living in Carp, and then, you know, I met my now wife, and we just wanted to eventually start a family and move somewhere that was more affordable, and that we would be able to afford at least a 1 or 2 bedroom, because Santa Barbara had gotten so expensive. It's $1,700 for a studio apartment, and we just couldn't afford to get anything bigger at the time with what I was making here and living in Santa Barbara, Carpinteria. So we were getting ready to move, and my dad said, you know, you guys can move into the back and rent the back unit, which, you know, I should have known better, but I thought since my uncle's passed away, maybe this will be my chance to actually have a relationship with my dad, right? So we moved in for some time. He ended up breaking his hip. We took care of him through 2 hip surgeries, did everything we could. He led me on, making me feel like I was gonna one day inherit the property. It was my grandpa's house, you know, that my grandpa left my dad and my uncles, and my dad was the last one left. It was where I was raised, you know. And even though I had so much pain and trauma, and horrible memories in that home, I thought maybe one day I'd be able to make it a happy home and to raise my own family there and forgive my dad, you know. But of course, you know, when my dad's hip healed, he went back to his old abusive ways, started trying to fight me all the time, and ended up going to jail for assault because it got caught on ring camera when he attacked me. And, you know, so we just were like, we're getting out of here. We had our wedding already, date set, and my dad was supposed to be there. Of course, he uninvited after attacking me, didn't come to the wedding. We got out of there as soon as possible, shortly after the wedding, and moved all the way across the country to where I'm at now, North Carolina. And as we were driving through Texas, I think we left Texas coming into Arkansas or something, I was like, I had my pipe and I had some CBD. I smoked the last of my CBD. I threw the pipe out the window because I didn't want to get pulled over and have to deal with that. And that was it. That was the end of smoking. But, you know, I feel so much more clear-headed without smoking. And I think about, you know, some of the relationships I had, you know, with girls who didn't smoke weed, and I don't know how the fuck they'd put up with me, like being high as fuck and just retarded. And I think about, you know, the friends, the deep conversations I had, and the times that I was, you know, with my friend. I don't know if I made the point, but I was talking about earlier how I had a friend that I was like going into things deep with, studying the Bhagavad Gita and spirituality, and I was on this journey. And I realized I was just like falling asleep. I was like exhausted. We started trying to do a podcast, and I'd be like nodding out during the podcast, smoking blunts and shit. And I was just like, this is so fucking whack. Like, this is no longer serving its purpose. I don't know if the weed is just too strong these days and it's just putting me out. like, you know, just like smoking dabs and all that shit. Like, I was just in a constant state of being numb. It was absolutely a waste of life, and I do not wish that for anybody. And I understand we're all trying to like self-medicate. We're all working through our past and things we've had to go through in our lives where we feel like this is necessary and this is helping and it's good to be comfortably numb. But the truth is it's not, and the best thing you can do is face those realities and those demons you have, so to speak, those face that trauma with a clear mind and get in touch with a higher power, right? And I used to think smoking weed connects me to God, all this stuff. Like, maybe it did enough at the time, but it wasn't until I really learned how God is and works through you that I was able to let go of all that and no longer need that. And we shouldn't need that. That's the thing too, is like, you shouldn't, like, if you feel like you have to smoke this external thing, then you probably shouldn't be doing that, right? This thing has a grip on you, has a hold of your life. If you have to smoke before you do anything, then this thing is in control, not you, right? No matter how much you try to tell yourself. So I don't know, that's just my story. I mean, I had a lot of great times smoking weed, and you know, met some great people, and the concerts were amazing, high as hell, and just the ritual of smoking was great and all, but you know, who knows if I'll be paying the price for all that stuff I smoked, you know, down the line. I pray not. I pray health and wealth and prosperity for everybody who's made it this far in this video, and I pray that you can overcome any challenges in your life, and I believe that you can. I believe in you. Just, you got to believe in yourself, though. No one will believe in you more than you believe in you. So that's the answer to it all. And a big part of it is knowing where you come from. Giving thanks, having gratitude, respecting your ancestors, and trying to leave this world better than when you came into it, right? I pray I could inspire a lot of people, with my story. It's been really hard, even still, but I know that God has a plan for all of us, and I know that there's power in believing you have the power to make a change and to be better. So do that. I guess I'll end it there. I know that there's a lot more I could have said in this, but I just wanted to share my little story about smoking weed and going through the system and being caught up in it and finding a way out. And just gotta acknowledge that God is great and that He loves you. And you gotta learn to love yourself and forgive others. And let God deal with them. So that's all I got for today. Until the next one, much love. Peace.